I always wanted to work for the CJN, even when it came as a newspaper in our house when I was growing up. It was a celebration. Everything stopped. We read the paper from cover to cover. Hi, I'm Ellen Besner, and I'm a journalist at the Canadian Jewish News, and I host the CJN Daily podcast. The CJN Daily is a way to showcase Canadian Jewish newsmakers around the world and hearing from the newsmakers themselves. I'm proud to do the work to continue to showcase the ways in which our friends, our neighbors, our rabbis are finding ways to find the beauty in their Jewish identity while upholding the civil rights that Canadian Jews have had since 1832. I'm proud to showcase how our community leaders are leading during these turbulent times, but we also hold them accountable too. We can only continue to tell these important stories with your help. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate to support our work, and you'll get a Canadian tax receipt to boot.
So I took the tattoo numbers and I translated them into their musical counterparts. And I found that they translated perfectly into this call and response.
Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Culturally Jewish. On this week's episode, we chat with Daniel Pelton, artist in residence for the Violins of Hope series at the National Music Center in Calgary.
Mama always wanted me to be a doctor, but I became an artist and that really shocked her. Now I'm interviewing people in the biz, pros, and newish, but all of them are artists and they're culturally Jewish.
Ilana, have you seen or heard of any good theater happening in LA right now?
So I was hanging out with a friend of mine who's Jewish last night, who's an LA local. And this isn't new, but this really angered me. And I think it angered her too. And she told me about this production of The Diary of Anne Frank, which instead of being about Anne Frank was about the true story of a Jewish woman in LA who created a safe house for a Latina mother and her two daughters after her husband was deported by ICE. And the idea was like, let's reset Anne Frank, but being about Latino people. And this was like after her and I were just kind of bemoaning the amount of times that she's auditioned for things in LA that were like Fiddler or Jewish Stories, whatever. And then they like cast so many non-Jews, and like there are a lot of Jewish actors here and they're just not getting those roles. And this one in particular like made me really mad. And it seems like it might have been directed by a Jew. I mean, Stan Zimmerman is the director. That sounds pretty Jewish.
I'm gonna bet yes.
I'm gonna bet yes. I just feel like it made me, first of all, think about Dara Horn's the dead Jews argument, because people fixate on Anne Frank as like the epitome of the story of the Holocaust and perseverance. But to me, a lot of the thinking that I've done after reading that book a few years ago is like, why are people obsessed with Anne Frank? Like, that's a lot of people's only interaction with Holocaust material. And also in high schools, people that I know who are not Jewish, that grew up in like rural parts of Canada, or not even rural parts, but just like, like Winnipeg or whatever, they honestly thought anti-Semitism ended and began in the Holocaust, because that's all they learned about in school. Maybe they read The Diary of Anne Frank. Maybe they saw like a Holocaust movie. And so to me, the fact that now we're taking this story, which is already getting so much attention, I think, like a little bit in an overblown way, and then we're making it about someone else. To me, it almost felt like a pardoning of like, well, it's not like Jews are not the only ones who are going through this. So let's take this very Jewish actual story and like make it about someone else to show the universality of why Holocaust education is so important, and make it less about Jews and actually give way for people to dismiss modern day anti-Semitism.
So, I mean, I want to take a step back and sort of ask the question to you is it the fact that it's the story of Anne Frank being de-Judified in a sense that's upsetting you, or is it something else too? The fact that it's just, this is how Holocaust education is done. If anything, we're going to talk about Holocaust education, it is just through the eyes of this girl, Anne Frank.
I think it's both, honestly. Because like I said, I think people focus way too much on Holocaust education as the way to teach people about anti-Semitism, which I think is actually really damaging. Because now you look at what's happening since October 7th, and a lot of whatever, we can have the whole anti-Zionist, anti-Semitist debate, whatever. People who are putting out things that fall into the anti-Semitism category, but in their minds, they're able to justify it because they're like, no, I'm just against Israel. And in their minds, they're like, well, anti-Semitism is about the Holocaust, and this is not about the Holocaust, so therefore I'm allowed to say whatever the fuck I want.
Right.
Wow, I did not mean to swear that intensely.
No, I think we're allowed to swear on our own podcast. Yes.
No, I know. I don't generally. But
because this is the question that we've had previously in the past about Holocaust education. Is it how do we do it in the 21st century? How do we do it post October 7th? Is it valuable? Because if people are learning about the Holocaust, but then maybe fail the lessons that are being taught about, is this a universal thing, or is this very particular Jewish history?
I mean, I think it needs to be taught as Jewish history. And also, I think when, you can't cover everything in a high school curriculum. Let's be real. There's a lot of ethnic groups that have been persecuted. Yes. But I think if they're going to do a day about anti-Semitism, they should teach students that anti-Semitism is very old and learn about blood libels and learn about how things led to this event. That I think we can't ignore Holocaust education. It is important, but it can't be the only thing. And if they don't have time to touch on it, at least to tell people, by the way, this is a bit of context to how, this is not the only time this has happened. In fact, it's happened many, 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 many times. And to stop fixating on Anne Frank as the symbol of Jewish persecution.
Right. And I've said this too in the past. It's not just about the past 2,000 years, but it's also about the present and the future of the Jewish community, where I would like
100%.
people to learn more about Jews in our lives, right, in the present day, that are accomplishing, doing wonderful things, who are being persecuted, and where the Jewish community is going to hopefully go in the future too.
That's actually one of the things Dara Horn talks about. I don't remember if it was the podcast or the book, where she was like, every Holocaust museum that she visited, which were mostly run by people who were not Jewish, were the ones running the museums or running the tours. There was a section at the end of the museum of people who are fighting for the cause. And most of them were not Jewish. It was modern day activists of different cultures who were spearheading anti-Black racism or blah, 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 blah. And she was like, we focus so much on the negative. Why not have a gallery of positive things that modern day Jews are doing? Because otherwise people think of Jews as being dead. And she uses, and I'll end it with this, but she uses examples of actual school groups that she in as part of researching her book, she talked to people, and a lot of school groups literally would go to these Holocaust museums and leave, and the teacher would be like, so what do you think, happened to the Jewish people since then? And they're like, oh, well, they obviously got wiped out. The Holocaust was the beginning and end of the Jews. Today there are no Jews that are doing things like that. And it's
or if they are, they all just become colonizers and oppressors.
Right. Anyway.
I mean, and this is the question, and we continue this question with the interview with Daniel Pelton, because we ask him, what does it mean to make his music in a post-October 7th world, talking about re-envisioning the Holocaust? And these are the questions that I think a lot of young artists are grappling with in terms of how to negotiate with the past, present, and future. So, just a bit of background for who Daniel Pelton is. He's an award-winning saxophonist and composer. He began playing the saxophone at the age of 9 and pursued his musical studies at the University of Calgary, graduating with a Bachelor's of Music in 2018. And this series, the Violin of Hope series, will be released on January 27th, which is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Let's take a listen. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, before we actually recorded, we started doing a bit of quasi-Jewish geography on whether someone that you work with could or maybe be Jewish, because it doesn't come up a lot in Calgary, right? There's not too many Jews, so it's easy to do Jewish geography.
You're not wearing a cowboy hat. Are you Jewish?
The two types of Calgarians.
So we want to know how the Violins of Hope series came together in the first place.
Absolutely. It's a bit of a long story in that the fact that the big piece of music that I wrote for it, I wrote way back in the winter of 2019 going into 2020, before I even knew that the Violins of Hope collection existed. For those who don't know, the Violins of Hope collection is a collection of instruments, primarily violins, that are all kind of relics of World War II and the Holocaust, and they were either recovered from concentration camps or they belonged to Jews who were taken to the camps and left their instruments with friends thinking that they were coming back, or just things found in empty houses after the war. So it's a pretty heavy collection of instruments.
And can you give us any specific stories about the violins? Like, do you know how they survived? If you can give us like one or two examples.
Absolutely. Something that I was unaware of, and I'm 29 years old and a Jew, and thought that I knew a fair amount about the Holocaust, but I was actually unaware that many of the camps did have orchestras that were staffed by inmates. And so one of the violins that we actually used on these recordings, it's called the Auschwitz violin. And the story is that when Auschwitz was liberated, one of the inmates in the camps actually like stumbled out of the camp, and he was holding this violin, and he just handed it off to someone for $50 or something and said, like, I have been in this camp for however long, and I only made it through by like performing music for the Nazis, and I could
Right.
never touch this thing again, and I never want to see another violin, so just like take it away from me.
When I think about the Holocaust, a lot of times in my mind, music comes into play a lot, right? I'm thinking of Schindler's List. A lot of times those two are synonymous. And I'm wondering why you think music, and maybe these violins specifically, have such a powerful role in preserving memory.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as we go on and on in time, the Holocaust, World War II, all of that ended 80 years ago now. We're approaching the 80th anniversary on January 27th of the liberation of Auschwitz. And so that is not a long time in terms of culture and history, but in terms of human life, like we're running out of Holocaust survivors, so to speak. And as we all know, anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial is on the rise in Canada and across the world. And so when we run out of people to tell their stories, unfortunately, what we have left are artifacts. And these instruments are artifacts that we can actually hold and create with. They're not just like, they're the shoes in the camps, of course, which tell a horrifying story. But these instruments are things that we can pick up and we can play and we can record music with them. We can kind of keep them functional and keep them going into the future. And with the recordings we make, we can tell these stories and kind of preserve them and renew them for future generations in a very unique way.
Because at the same time, when we're talking about preserving memory, this is also music that you have created. Right? It's not the music from the camps. It's not music created by Holocaust survivors. Is there any cause of concern? Is there any worry that people are going to look at this and say, this is just a fabrication, right? This is not preserving memory. This is just sort of the next step, possibly of a devaluation of the Holocaust? Or is there any worry from people who are going to say, this proves, Holocaust deniers' points that this is just made up because you're in a sense making up new songs?
Yeah, that actually is something that I do worry about. And I was actually in conversation with the Auschwitz Museum and Memorial about putting a talk together about telling stories of the Holocaust. We were talking about Schindler's List, and obviously there are lots of fictional characters, like even Magneto from the X-Men is like a Holocaust survivor in canon. And I don't have an answer, but I think there's definitely an interesting conversation to be had about, like, can you tell stories about something as horrific as the Holocaust? And like, should you, and how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, I agree that it does give the deniers, they can be like, how could the Holocaust happen? Like, Magneto's not real kind
Exactly.
of thing, which is a tenuous argument. But like, just any argument is an argument to be had for those kinds of people.
Yeah.
And I definitely understand those concerns. But at the same time, I do think that story is the best way to preserve things.
And what's your own personal relationship to the Holocaust? Do you have survivors in your family?
No survivors, but I'm Jewish through my mother's side.
Okay.
And her Zadie's family, they fled to Venezuela. And I think her Zadie's dad was like the only one of many brothers, like 5 to 10 brothers, who decided to leave Europe, and
Right.
everyone else in his family died. And
Yeah.
yeah. And then my bubby, her mother fled Poland earlier, like in the 30s, and ended up in London, and then came to Canada before the war started.
Did you find that, because I know as Jews, it's very common for people not to share these stories. Like, I feel like as I get older, and I'm similar to you, where my direct line, we don't have any survivors, but, you know, my great grandmother's sister, we found out, perished in the Holocaust. She stayed and nobody knew what happened to her. And then recently we found that out. Did you find working on this project that you were able to have some of those conversations with members of your family of like, what do you know? Because a lot of people, because of trauma, we don't really talk about it. These stories often get buried.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something that I had just never really thought of that much before, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I just never had a reason to come across anything like that, and I hadn't had a reason to question anything like that until like really October 7th, I think, was a big wake-up call for a lot of North American Jews who thought that we were kind of just chilling. It turns out we are not just chilling. But I hadn't thought about that. And so I think after October 7th and during my Violins of Hope thing, my sister in particular is very interested in the history of our family.
Okay.
And so that's when because there are different online services as well where you can like look up your family members and they will like point you to which camps they were at and all of that, because everything was very well documented. And so we did a little bit of that, and we did end up talking to our Bubby and Zadie and our family members and just learning really interesting things of like one of my great aunts went to school as a mathematician in Montreal, and she talked about how one of her lab partners like showed up halfway through the term, like in the midst of World War II or right after World War II, and was just like the last person alive from his whole family and like whole neighborhood. And how he just kind of was like, yeah, I'm here. Everyone else I know died terribly. And now I just want to do good at school.
Woof.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want this podcast to sound like a bit like of a broken record, but it's true. October 7th, every time we interview someone, they say this was a watershed moment for my identity as a Jew, right? It keeps coming up again and again. Do you think that that day is a defining moment for you? Or is it something that is affecting you deeply over the past year, but in 5 years or in 10 years, it will be like a horrible time that we're going to commemorate on a yearly anniversary and then move on with our lives? Or do you think that that has changed the course of your life and how you see yourself?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say change the course of my life, but I would say defining moment for sure, where I just realized it's like, obviously growing up, there's Holocaust education in schools and everyone was like, yes, Nazis are bad, anti-Semitism is bad, never again, etc., etc. And I had assumed we were all on the same page for that. And then October 7th happened, and when there's like literal footage of Jews being slaughtered and burned alive, women and children, everyone was like, well, hang on a second, maybe there's a context that makes this okay. And I was like, weren't we all just saying silence is violence like 2 seconds ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in our community, like the arts community as a whole. That's how we found it, Ilana and myself, is that backlash very directly from people we know and admire and respect.
Yeah. I want to circle back to talking a bit more about Violins of Hope. So I'd love to hear a bit about your process. You were chosen to partake in a residency to create this piece. First off, how much freedom did you have in your creation process? Like, were you given free reign to, use these violins, take what you know and create something, or were there certain parameters or certain, angles that they wanted you to go towards?
Absolutely. So the application process involved like propose a project for these violins, and then you get a week in the studio to fulfill that project. And so pretty free reign, but I think they went through all of the proposed projects and, picked the one that they thought would suit it the best. So that means that they liked it, which means that I would get free reign with it. The project that I submitted, and this kind of ties into what you were talking about earlier, David, with stories and how those work. But going back to what I said about starting this music way in the winter of 2019, going into 2020, earlier in the year, I had been dramatically dumped from my first like big long-term relationship, and was kind of going into my first winter alone in a
Winter of
while.
discontent.
Winter of discontent, the dark Calgary cold. And I thought, what's a young Jewish boy to do but like really lean into this, and let's like start reading Holocaust books to just really like,
Oh, of course, right?
yeah,
That's the answer.
yeah, because I am suffering and my people have suffered. And so I read The Tattooist of Auschwitz, which the Auschwitz Memorial does have an issue with in terms of like total 100% factual accuracy, but the bones of the story are true in the fact that the two real people did meet in the camp and fall in love and endure hell and make it through and get married after. And so I read this book and I was very moved by it. And I had two reactions, which were like, wow, am I ever lucky to have the problems that I have today, here and now, because I'm just sad about a breakup and not being sent off to camps. Conversely, this guy got a girlfriend in like the worst time and place for him to be alive in history, and I'm single. How'd that happen?
Oh wow, the Jewish psyche.
And how did that translate into your process?
Yeah, so I remember sitting at my keyboard in the middle of the night after finishing this book, and I was thinking about like, wow, I'm a musician and I'm having these feelings and like I'm Jewish, and how do I put all this together into like a creative expression? And I was thinking back to my music theory classes, and there's something called 12-tone harmony, in which you take all of the notes in a scale, the chromatic notes of a scale, and they go from 0 to 11 in 12 pitches and semitones. And so I took the tattoo numbers from the characters in the book and I translated them into their musical counterparts. And I found that the numbers were 34902, 32407. And I found that they like translated perfectly into this call and response. And I thought, wow, that is like, these people have like a real world, very intimate relationship, and their tattoos have this like very call and response musical relationship like that. That seems profound somehow. And so I kind of just started working with these notes and these motives, and I created this 12-minute piece of music for chamber orchestra that takes these numbers and these notes and these motives. Goal was to kind of get as much expression and as much just kind of feeling out of them as possible, because the Nazis gave Jews these tattoos to take away their humanity, and you're not a person anymore, you're a number. And so I thought if I could take these numbers and create something as human and as expressive as possible, that would be kind of a way to reclaim their humanity a little bit. And so that was the project that I had, and that's what I proposed to the NMC, and that's what got me the residency.
And so those numbers you said you took from the book, but those were the numbers of the real people it was based on?
As far as I know, those are the real tattoos of the real people.
And then the songs that you used in Violins of Hope, was that a new version of that, or did you actually keep those number dedications in the final version?
I kept those numbered dedications. I just took that music off of the shelf and put it in front of the musicians.
It's a really cool concept. I love that.
Yeah, it worked out really well.
And is this, you had said you felt inspired to create something Jewish. Based on what I'm hearing, was this your first time creating a score based on, a Jewish theme or Jewish history? And what was your experience like when you actually dove into that?
It was my first time, I think, creating even just like that conceptually to begin with. Normally, my big musical hero is Frank Zappa. His music is kind of very irreverent and cynical, and I think it's genius and very immensely technical and talented. But he was very much like he liked to have fun and make jokes and do all that. And so that's a lot of my music. I tend to think is more just goofy. And so this was kind of my first time like sitting down and getting very conceptual and kind of purposefully having like real world concept that I'm trying to translate into music.
How do audiences react when they hear these violins played?
They are very profoundly affected by them. We had some open rehearsals at the NMC where I was rehearsing the chamber orchestra, and we allowed museum patrons to just kind of like walk in and out of the hall. And those were pretty popular. And then the orchestra, the Calgary Philharmonic here, actually also played a program with the Violins of Hope, and they were playing music from Schindler's List and Jewish composers. And so that was a very exciting and meaningful program as well. And then NMC also hosted a series of concerts with like string quartets and such. And then when the exhibit was up in the National Music Center, they also had people like performing on the violins while people were walking through the exhibits. So people got a lot of opportunity to not only see the violins and hear their stories, but also to actually hear them in action, which I think was really important.
Do you think that doing a concert like this might bring in a new audience, especially a young audience? As you mentioned before, we are losing a lot of our survivors. There's more Holocaust denial. Do you think this is a new way in instead of reading a book or watching a film? Like, what have you experienced with younger people in terms of maybe when you've talked about this show coming up?
I want to say that it'll bring in younger people, but I am just doubtful. I think like you'll get Hillel.
Okay.
Right.
But I think a lot of the younger people are just so caught up in their Instagram anti-Israel thing that any connection to Israel or Judaism at whole, they're going to find a way to be like, oh, I don't want to, like, if I go to these or if I listen to this, then I am like directly giving Netanyahu my money or something. I hope
don't worry,
I'm wrong.
TikTok's about to be banned any day now.
Yeah, true. Thank God.
Yeah, I would love to be wrong about what I'm saying, so I hope I'm wrong, but I think I'm a little cynical.
Well, do you think then, because my next question is, what role do you see the series playing in Holocaust education? Like, do you think that this is something that's going to be able to tour around schools, be it Calgary or the greater Alberta region, or is it something that's going to be very localized?
I would love to be able to take this to schools and everything. The Violins of Hope exhibit, as I said earlier, does tour. And so I would love it if these recordings or samples of these recordings could tour with them, because in any museum exhibit, you could just have it playing over the speakers in the museum while people are walking around, or as a kind of exhibit piece in a listening room of like, this is what these instruments can do. This is something that we've done with them. These are ways to kind of tell stories about Holocaust survivors in a new way. And then live performances, of course, I would love to happen as well. All of that takes money and funding and organizing people, which, just makes everything a little bit harder. So I hope that this contributes to a broader Holocaust education environment. I really hope it does. I don't know if it will, but I'm trying everything that I can to get it there.
Do you think that this might inspire more Jewish music from you moving forward?
I think it's definitely opened that up in me. I think before I, again, just wasn't really thinking of myself that way at all.
Yeah.
Until October 7th kind of made it clear that whether or not I thought of myself that way, other people definitely would. So you may as well embrace it and do what you can with it.
It's strange how that happens, because there's like that prototypical question that you get asked, like, are you a Jewish artist or are you like an artist who happens to be Jewish? And even for myself as an actor and writer, a bunch of years ago, I probably would have said, what do you mean? Like, that's who I am in my life, but not in my art. And I feel like the more bad experiences that I've had, and also doing this Jewish arts podcast, it feels a lot more important to me to be creating work around Jewish identity, because it feels like the world is trying to like take it away from us. And we need to find those spaces to tell those stories and to feel good and proud of our identities.
Mm-hmm. Or even just safe.
Or even just safe.
Can we get a baseline of just feeling safe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel, I just want to say thank you so much. And I hope around Passover that we both see each other at the Heritage Safeway.
That sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care and all the best.
I'm Michael Weisdorf, Chief Executive Officer with the Canadian Jewish News. We've put a lot of effort into trying to engage with the younger audience and the younger demographic, those who haven't really engaged with the CJN recently. They don't realize we're back. They say, I absolutely remember reading this on my Booby and Zadie's dining room table or my parents' den. We're trying to bring the Canadian Jewish News into the 21st century. The Canadian Jewish News is a not-for-profit organization, and we're also a registered journalism organization with the CRA. So we can provide tax receipts for donations at any level. To help support the Canadian Jewish News and help us continue providing free, high-quality journalism for the Jewish community, you can support us at thecjn.ca/donate. Thank you for your support and for being a part of our journey.
So, David, what is on the docket in Jewish Canada?
So, I don't know if you know this, but February is Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. On February the 2nd at the JCC in Calgary, they're going to have a presentation called L'Chaim, Tea, Songs, and Stories with Chazan Daniel Benolo. Chazan Daniel is a cantor, rabbi, and founder of the Montreal Shira Choir for adults with disabilities.
Oh, yeah, I've seen them.
You've seen them? Okay, I haven't.
Yeah, at the October 7th memorial concert that I went to, like not long after it happened, that choir sang as one of the acts.
Excellent. So he will be there in person. He will sing and speak on the power of music, showing how singing together builds community and promotes inclusion. For more information, go to jewishcalgary.org. Ilana, what's happening on your end?
So in Toronto, this started on January 19th, but it's going on until February 1st, so you still got a chance to check it out, is Kafka, a 6-episode limited series. Discover the mystery and the scandals, the romance and imagination of the iconic author. So this is a mini-series that explores the life of Franz Kafka and his relationships, and each episode explores like a different defining aspect of his life and art.
I don't know much about Kafka, so that does sound quite interesting for me.
Yeah. So that's in Toronto as part of TJFF, the Toronto Jewish Film Festival's virtual cinema. So you can check that out on their website.
Also on February 2nd, the University of Calgary will present the lecture Black Milk, The Fragility of Childhood in the Shoah, presented by Dr. Sarah R. Horowitz. And her lecture will focus on 4 children whose wartime stories followed all different paths. Their childhood memories refracted through 4 distinct genres of literary memoir, fiction, graphic novel, and photography. The event is going to occur at the Central Public Library, and it is a free event to attend.
Amazing. I wanted to give a little shout out to the Museum of Jewish Montreal. If you are a performer, please check out this link that we will put in the show notes for the annual Purim party. They are looking for acts
already
such as
Purim.
I know. Well, they got to schedule in advance, but they're looking for drag performers, burlesque performers, cabaret performers, and beyond. So the actual Purim party is Thursday, March 13th in Montreal at the museum. And there is a form that you can fill out, which is due on February 9th. If you want to perform at the museum's annual Purim party, you should check it out.
You should absolutely check it out. Well, Ilana, I hope your travels in LA continue to go well. I hope you're making good contacts. And when do you get back to Canada?
I am here until the end of February, and then we will slowly make our way back. We're thinking of taking Route 66 to get back.
Ooh.
Because, why not? It's so cool. And it ends in Santa Monica, so.
It does. It's true.
Go backwards.
That sounds like an awesome trip. Well, I hope everything's going well, as I said, and
thank you.
Be in touch, and we'll see you next time.
Culturally Jewish is hosted by me, David Sklar, and
Ilana Zackon.
We're produced and edited by Michael Fraiman, and our theme music is by Sarah Siegel-Lazar. We're a member of the CJN Podcast Network. To support our work and everything the CJN does, visit thecjn.ca/donate to make a monthly donation and receive a charitable tax receipt.
Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.